Hi, Michael. Welcome to the podcast. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. And you?
I'm good as well. Thanks for asking. So, Michael, it's great to have you here, and we basically wanted to understand your journey, your perspective. How is it that you ended up being the CEO of AsInt as we know it? So, before jumping into that, I would want to know that how did you start your oil and gas journey in general?
Yeah, so I always find it interesting when people ask how I started in this industry. And so I started in the oil fields of West Texas in 1987. And when I first got started, I worked around inspection, specifically around visual inspections for turnarounds and in radiography for pipelines, things like that. And when people hear that, they're a little surprised, right? I think they expect to have a bunch of degrees, engineering degrees, things like that. But I find that people often overlook and not give enough credit to this type of background. And what I mean by that is I find tremendous value in what I do today for risk-based inspection. I find a lot of value in where I started doing the NDE and the visual inspections really helps me understand how an asset is put together, right? The welding procedures and the welding processes, things like that, all the way through to, finding specific damage mechanisms and deterioration of that piece of equipment. I find my background really lends itself to understanding those failure modes and how they're going to propagate. And then, of course, that would then allow me to kind of visualize, if you will, a mitigation plan. So I think it's, the field experience is sometimes overlooked in our industry, especially,
Yeah.
starting out. But I mean, now, as I mentioned, starting in 1987, probably less of an issue now that I've got 35, 37 years in the industry.
That's absolutely great to know. Michael, while you were telling it just made me wonder that you're coming from a background which is core field background, which is basically from the roots, as they say, touching the steel and knowing more about the field jobs. How did you come up with the idea of being in a software company? We know that you were a product manager in your previous role. So how did you come up with the idea of Ascent along with the other two founders?
Yeah, so I think, moving into software was just a natural evolution of my career. When you think back to when I started, right, everything was very paper driven. We recorded all of our inspections on papers, and those went immediately into a file cabinet. And so as the software industry started coming around, I think it was kind of a natural evolution to kind of move into that direction. And then, you mentioned my background as a product manager for other solutions that are on the industry market today. And then being able to drive product in a particular direction, I think is what really pushed all three of us, founding members of Ascent, into starting Ascent and doing something for ourselves. We all three kind of hit a brick wall, if you will, with other companies, and we were only allowed to innovate and elevate that product to a certain extent. And out of that frustration, if you will, Ascent was kind of born through a conversation the three of us had of how can we do this better? How can we do this differently? Instead of competing with one another, why don't we join forces and take all of that experience and all of that background and build our own product? And I think you see that in the Ascent solution today, the functionality that we offer and the way that we offer it. I think you see that diverse background displayed there.
So yeah, absolutely. I see that the agility of the tool, the different thought processes coming together, that's absolutely visible in the tool. So Michael, having said that, I want you to talk more about how did you come up with SAP as a partner? And when we talk about other software products, so basically there are two questions here. It's easy to visualize a product manager or a product being developed from a consumer standpoint. But when it comes to asset integrity in general, right now, Ascent is developing products which is for all the verticals, pharmaceuticals and semiconductors, etc., etc. So, how did you guys manage to do that to make a software so agile?
Yeah, great question. So the first part of that around the SAP platform itself, I think we all each individually struggled with the data management. I think it's still to this day the single biggest hurdle that most of owner operators, regardless of the industry vertical, as you mentioned, it's the biggest hurdle that they're facing today. And so we really focused on how do we help mitigate that? And the conclusion that we came to was leveraging the SAP platform because of its breadth of coverage and into other industry verticals, as well as being well established in oil and gas. But it gave us a great foundation to de-silo the data that people are creating around risk and reliability type solutions. And a lot of them are doing it anywhere from an Excel spreadsheet to 3 to 5 other databases that they're using on a daily basis. So if you think about the SAP solution, the breadth of coverage that SAP allows us to entry level into these other market verticals. And what we do is we can pull all of the data together from these data silos, anywhere from 3 to 5 solutions that people are using in a risk and reliability program today to accomplish the same thing we do in a single database. And so leveraging the SAP master data just seemed like the most logical solution to help them get over these hurdles of data management on a daily basis.
So, Michael, I wanted to ask basically, are you guys restricted to just asset integrity and reliability, or is there something else or other forte which you are trying to explore?
Yeah, so again, a great question because I think, everybody tends to start with a single pain point, right? And so when we started talking about creating our own company and creating our own solution, I think the feedback we got from the market said, start with mechanical integrity and RBI, right? But since then, we have really branched into many other solutions, into safety, CIS, SIL, LOPA, those types of things, from that all the way through to RCM, FMEA type products, and as well as, more niche or specific products like a 571 damage mechanism solution. So things like that, I think we're getting into a little bit of everything, right? We're trying to put the products that are causing the most pain points for our clients and owner operators in various industries. We're trying to put those into the SAP format, again, to de-silo that data and to leverage that same common master data. So again, all the way through to like process hazard analysis and things like that we're providing solutions for today.
That's really great to know, Michael. While you were mentioning about these new technologies, new workflows, it made me think we talk a lot about mobility applications, mobiles being used as a means of inspections. And I know that you have started the company when it was more like a paper based inspection. And now companies are transitioning towards mobile phone based inspection. So, Michael, I just wanted to understand, you have been interacting with so many of the customers lately. So, is this mobile inspection, the mobile inspection we have been talking about a lot these days, so is it really being used or embraced by the industry, or it's just a gimmick? How do you feel about that?
Yeah, so I think you see these things come in cycles, right? So as I mentioned, from the start of my career, paper-based to a logical progression into software solutions. And I think the mobility is the next iteration of that, if you will. So it's definitely moving in that direction. And I think what we try to do differently at AsInt is focus on what activities will really be performed in the field and which activities provide value and should be considered a field activity. So what immediately comes to mind when I talk about that is CUI, right? So if you take CUI assessment, a fair amount of that is done in the field or should be done in the field. And the questions that are being asked and answered on a CUI assessment, for example, they have to be done in the field. Otherwise, it's speculation or stale data, if you will, right? And so I think what some companies struggle with is they try to take their entire solution into a mobile app. And for the most part, that's just it's not really feasible to assume that somebody is going to be in the field performing a risk assessment. So if you
Yeah.
streamline that and say just certain elements of this assessment are going to be done in the field, and those are, pressures and temperatures where you're out there reading gauges or using a temp gun to take your temperatures for a CUI assessment. If you focus on the data that is relevant and is best collected in the field, then I think you come up with a much more robust value adding mobile solution.
Perfect. That's exactly what even I was thinking about, the same thing. So, Michael, when we say that AsInt is basically a software provider, we see there is a separate arm of the industry which is also providing solutions to the industry. They are providing services related to implementation of risk-based inspection plans and different arms of industry. They are trying to implement that, service providers as we call them. So, how do you see AsInt? AsInt have the technical prowess to implement these solutions, or how does it work with AsInt?
Yeah, so we do provide consulting services and engineering services. I think it's inevitable if you build a robust software solution, your clients that you're selling this software to are going to ask you to help implement and support that software solution. And in so doing that, you're pretty much driven to bring on, world-class engineering staff across the board, whether it's doing damage mechanism reviews or software engineering, writing code. I think that AsInt has gathered together the best team I've ever worked with in my 37 years. Again, that is across the board, everywhere from field implementation and data collection to writing the code.
That's really great to know. And yeah, it's in my personal experience as well. I've seen some of the most brilliant minds working here. And the kind of mentorship that I see over here is pretty good. Which brings me to my next question. We are seeing different companies work differently. So what's the working model with is like? So is there a fixed hierarchy towards which every employee has to comply, or how does the different teams interact with each other? There must be some development arm, the product. So how does all those work in sync together to build out a product?
Yeah, so we've tried to keep it, interesting here at AsInt, and we do, of course, have a development department, software development department. We have a project support and project engineering department. So we have all of those that you would expect to see in any organization. But really, that just allows us to know direct reporting hierarchy or structure, if you will. And what we try to do, and what you'll find at AsInt, is really everybody's doing a little bit of everything. Obviously, they're not asking me to write code, but aside from the fine details of one's job assessment, I may be doing a 581 assessment review today, and tomorrow, answering RFPs or RFIs and doing product management type work. We're writing requirements and acceptance criteria the next day. So we wear many hats, and we do that for a reason, right? We want everybody to work to their strengths, and we also want people to gain experience across the board and not just be behind a computer monitor day in and day out. Get out, interact with the clients, gather requirements from them, listen to how they're using the software, because it's going to help us implement a better solution, and it's going to help us understand how the industry uses their software solutions, right? And so one of the things we really focus on that's different from many software vendors out there is we believe that the software should be tailored to an owner operator's best practices, not the other way around, right? So you shouldn't buy a piece of software and then have to rewrite your processes and procedures to conform to that piece of software. It should be the other way around, right? Your software should strengthen and streamline your best practices. Otherwise, it really is not serving its purpose.
Yeah. So, Michael, you were mentioning about getting to interact with different clients, getting to know their requirements. So, you have been going to these different conferences around the globe. Is there any interesting experience you would like to share where you would really like to tell the industry about your experience to all these conferences that are happening around the globe throughout the year?
Yeah, so I think, from my perspective, we talked early on about my background in inspection. And so I think, one of the things that I'm most proud of is having served on the API committees for many years, right? So help writing the codes and the standards that the industry is following, not just here in the States, but globally. And when I sit in those meetings, I'm generally looking at these codes and standards from a much different perspective, right? We as an industry seem to put a lot of emphasis on the algorithms of how to calculate an RBI assessment. And often that causes us to not spend enough time on how to mitigate or properly mitigate the risk once it's determined. So I think in there is a balance, right? And so what I try to do and what I find some interesting conversation is, okay, we have an A3 risk. What does that mean now? What inspections are we going to perform? What new technologies are on the market today to help us better monitor that so that we can lower that risk threshold and operate in a much safer overall risk of our assets?
Understood. That makes a lot of sense, Michael. So you talked briefly about the API committee. So how do you see these committees going forward? There are various committees. As I see, there is ASME Section 8. We use this ASME Section 8 Division 1. So American Society of Mechanical Engineers, American Petroleum Institute. So how do you think the industry is taking these codes and standards coming from these committees forward? What's next? Are we going to follow this convention throughout, or is there something else that's coming in? And one more question before you answer this, Michael. So there are several new technology that's coming in. So technologies like artificial intelligence, machine learning. So are these organizations trying to incorporate or embrace these new technologies as well? Would like to know your thoughts as well here.
Yeah, so great questions, and I'll split that up into two parts, and we'll talk about it from a code perspective first of all, and then we'll get to what I'll refer to as the technology side of that question. And so, when you think about the API standards and where they're going, I think again you got to kind of start at the beginning. So, for example, 581, right? So if we're talking about RBI, we're talking in most cases, or in a lot of cases, we're talking about API 581. And so that base resource document was published in 1996, right? And so it became what we refer to as API RP, which is American Petroleum Institute Recommended Practice 581 first edition in 2000, right? And the basis of that document back then were pretty narrow use cases, right? So now, if we just take it from the first edition, right, we're 24 years into this RBI practice by now, right? And so incorporating a much broader spectrum of use cases into the API document, I think is what you're beginning to see with that committee and those subcommittees. And then just using 581 as an example there, but that's across the board, whether it's API 510 as an inspection code or 581 as a risk-based inspection code. I think those industry learnings are being adapted into those codes and standards. So you're getting a much more robust standard to base your best practices on. So then when you flip that over and start talking about the technology side, obviously we've talked about software solutions and the evolution of mobility and the next iteration of that coming, a lot of people are talking about, is artificial intelligence or AI, right? And I think AI is going to be a great tool for us to leverage. We've already begun to adopt AI into the AsInt solution in various spots. We've talked a little bit earlier on about damage mechanism reviews and leveraging AI to analyze our data and point out areas of susceptibility to a specific damage mechanism is certainly one use case for artificial intelligence. But I would like to articulate a best first step. Right. So oftentimes when new technology is introduced into the industry, we go all in. right? And like I mentioned, with people trying to take their entire software solution on a mobile device, when it comes to artificial intelligence, I think the first logical step in that is to reduce your IT footprint. Right. So we also talked about de-siloing data and how that was a bit of motivation for us to move to the SAP APM solution. And I think that's a great first step, because if you think about leveraging artificial intelligence, depending on how you want to use it. Let's say you want to use it to compile a robust inspection summary of all of the inspections we've performed on an asset over the past 15 years. And AI can certainly help you go back, review that, and make a concise but informative inspection summary. But if you're going to do that, how much better would it be if you had all of your data in a single software solution, rather than have an AI scan each individual database and then consolidate those, and then have AI again review the consolidated version of that inspection history? If it were all under the same umbrella to begin with, then I think you now have the ability to leverage the full capabilities of an AI type solution. So I think, it's great to have that on your corporate roadmap, that you all want to leverage the latest and greatest technology. But there's things we can do today that will help us prepare ourselves for really taking advantage of the new technology as it comes to us.
That's wonderful to know, Michael. We see that there is time series data coming in for us, and we utilize that and lose and whatnot. And we have all these different sensors being there on the field. So, how exactly are these IOWs and this real time data being captured right now without the AI? And how do you see that being happening after AI comes into the picture?
Yeah, so great question. I think you see a lot of people in various industries now talking about integrity operating windows or safe operating windows, and sometimes those are used as interchangeable. They're really two separate windows and two separate purposes that drive the definition of those operating windows. But today, through various solutions, the data is being gathered from the field, but it's often only used by operations. And what I mean by that is that the data, operating pressures and temperatures and flow rates and things like that, are being collected today, but generally it's being analyzed around product quality or productivity. It's not really being looked at by our risk and reliability departments. But it's the same data, right? So I could look at pressures and temperatures and flow rates, my amine distillation column, and it would be very informative to me to help determine corrosion rates and predict the remaining life of my asset, not just to tell you the quality of the amine that is being used and how productive I could be downstream of that, right? So the data is all there today. Oftentimes in some older facilities, it's all manual. So you got to go out and actually read gauges or for pressures and temperatures, things like that. But more and more you see the software being implemented in the field and the devices being implemented in the field that's collecting this information for us. So the next logical step in that would be to present that data or make that data available to all departments, right, to our risk and reliability engineers, so that we can use things like artificial intelligence to say, hey, scan this operating pressure and temperature and flow rate in my amine unit, scan that and tell me when you see excursions, right? When is my temperature elevated above 200 degrees for extended periods of time, or my flow rate above 6 feet per second for extended periods of time, because we know those types of excursions will affect our corrosion rates for a particular damage mechanism.
Yeah, yeah, agreed. So thank you so much, Michael, for your time today. It's been great interacting with you and getting to know your insights, especially for us, the folks who are just entering the industry to get the hang of it, to get the taste of it. Um, from someone like you, a veteran like you, it's always a pleasure. So thanks for your time and looking forward to more such interactions.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me. As you can tell, or hope you can tell from the my responses, I'm very passionate about AsInt, about the solutions that we're providing, and passionate about working with industry experts and partners to really bring a more robust solution to the industry.
It was great interacting with you, Michael. Wishing you all the best for your upcoming event. Thanks for your time today. Cheers.
Thank you all.